question. I come from a biological anthropology background, so I did some evolutionary genomics research in my undergrad. And my interests are really in how evolutionary medicine, or like how evolution can benefit medicine. We kind of already talked about how people don't understand evolution, and there's this kind of almost backlash against it, but I think evolution can be extremely informative as far as a personalized medicine perspective. So under personalized medicine is the idea of personalized nutrition. So I just want to draw this for you. There's a few ways that we recommend nutrient intake. So there's EARs, which are estimated average requirements, and that meets 50% of the needs of the population. Then there are RDAs, which are supposed to meet 97% of the population. And then way over here, there are upper limits, which are the maximum dosage that you should take of a specific nutrient. So as you can see, there's a lot of space in between here and in between here. So what I'm interested in is what are the genetic variables that are going to affect nutrient requirements, especially within this area with a 47% gap, and really not a large milligram dosage change or even microgram dosage change. And then are there some people who have a genetic predisposition that might make the RDA not enough for them, and somewhere in between the RDA and the upper limit, are they going to need a value within that range? So just a quick example, we don't completely understand the evolution of apolipoprotein E. Apolipoproteins are proteins on the outer shell of lipoproteins. So you guys have probably heard LDL is like bad cholesterol, HDL is good cholesterol. Well, these lipoproteins contain a lot of genetic variants, and they're also responsible for delivering cholesterol, fat, but also fat-soluble vitamins out into all your cells pretty much. And there are specific variants of apolipoprotein E that bind more tightly to some cells than others, and it affects vitamin K delivery. So that's just a really quick example where if we work out the evolutionary understanding of that, understand who has those specific variants, what populations they generally come from, we might be able to, since we can't really address everyone's genome, make more recommendations based on, hey, you're ancestrally coming from this population, you might need slightly more vitamin K intake because you probably have this variant because your populations have really high prevalences of it. So that this is more of a micronutrient thing, so like your vitamins, your minerals is affected. A really well understood example that I'll go through is in starch digestion. So starches are alpha 1-4 glucose linkages. So it's just a long chains of glucose. Glucose is a 6-carbon ring. And then you have amylose and amylopectin, which just lots of glucoses and they branch in different ways. But for humans, we eat a lot of starches. So you guys eat grains, carbohydrates, sweet potatoes, that kind of thing. And your body uses something called amylase to break that down. Now, amylase is a pretty evolutionarily conserved gene. So you have bacteria that produce amylase all the way up to humans and chimpanzees and things producing amylase. Amylase is really interesting to me because from an evolutionary anthropology standpoint, you can look at amylase and see a lot of differences between chimpanzees and humans, and also bonobos. Chimpanzees and bonobos are our two evolutionarily closest relatives. We have a common ancestor with them about 6 million years ago. But you don't see a lot of sequence divergence, so just your typical A's, C's, G's, and T's that make up your DNA sequence. There's not, the changes, they're very small changes that don't really affect the protein too much. But when you look at the entire genome of a chimpanzee versus humans, you're seeing a lot more copies of amylase. And higher copy number tends to lead to higher transcription of that protein. So you have more amylase and ideally can digest more starches. So that's one way when you're looking at a chimpanzee versus the humans, you're seeing differences. And what is that telling us about starch digestion, the role of starches in the human diet, and how we can utilize them? And then when you look further, if you look into the human population, there's a lot of variation based on population structure in the past on amylase copy number. So there's a few papers out there that looked at amylase copy number and the ancestral populations of them, and found that traditionally starch-eating, like heavy starch diet ancestral populations led to selection onto amylase copy number, and they have a high amylase copy number in the saliva. So they produce a lot of salivary amylase, and it helps with starch digestion. So say you're of European descent, there is a strong chance that you have a very high copy number of amylase. But if you're of Asian American descent or if you're African descent, there's a strong chance you have a low copy number for amylase. And that can lead to a lot of recommendations for personalized nutrition, because if you have, there's only a small study. It was actually done at the Monell Chemical Sciences Center here in Philadelphia, right over on Penn's campus. And there's a small study to show that amylase copy number is related to postprandial, which is just right after you eat, glucose tolerance. So they're not exactly 100% sure of the mechanism, but high amylase copy number was associated with much better glucose control. And if you are able to, I mean, we all heard about glucose control and diabetes, and there's a lot of complications that can, over the long term, have, because glucose is that 6-carbon ring that has a lot of hydroxyl groups, which are quite reactive oxygen species, and can lead to oxidation. I'm sure everyone's heard of antioxidants, and you want to stop oxidation. So this could be something that, in the long run, when we kind of understand the exact evolutionary history and ancestral population history of amylase, we can start to make really personalized recommendations for, are you best fitted to do the 300 recommended daily grams of carbohydrates a day? Can you handle a bit more? Can you handle more processed carbohydrates versus a more whole grain version, or something like a legume, which has already a really low glucose response after eating it? Or are you on the other end where you don't have many copies of it, you have really kind of impaired glucose tolerance because your amylase copy number, and you should stick to very low glycemic index carbohydrates. So that's just a really quick example. We learned a lot about amylase by comparing it to the chimpanzee and bonobo sequences, and then looking at ancestral population history. So the whole evolution of amylase seems to be really informative for how is this affecting biomedical recommendations. And I think that this is really important for understanding how evolutionary history can affect personalized medicine recommendations as we move into an era of much more personalized medicine, where we're going to make recommendations based on your individual genes. And I think it's really important for, like as we kind of talked about with your presentation, understanding evolution and people's misconceptions about evolution and how evolution can be beneficial. And it doesn't have to be this war with religion. There's a lot of things that we can learn from it, and I think it can definitely make science education a lot better. Does anybody have any questions?
Am I asking too many questions?
No,
you guys are
it's
studying
very
really
helpful.
cool things, so I really want to know. So you said that there's like a lot of differences in amylase copy number between different human populations.
Mm-hmm.
So do you know if that's mostly driven by loss of amylase copies or by gene duplication?
I don't know if I mentioned that. Chimpanzees only have one copy, and bonobos have accumulated some mutations that lead to a non-functional amylase gene. So based on an evolutionary analysis, since you can kind of assume that the least common ancestor, or the most recent common ancestor probably would have only had a low copy number as well. So it appears that this is a very recent sort of event that we have a lot of amylase copy numbers in human populations, but other species don't. There's also there's actually a difference between the salivary or the parotid amylase and then also the pancreatic amylase. But the salivary ones are more recent evolutionary history, more recent evolutionary history and retroviral insertions and things like that I won't get into. But they show extreme sequence conservation to the very few mutations, which makes us believe it was a very recent event in human evolution. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, absolutely.
So do you think this would be better described as like personalized nutrition to the individual, or to like a society or like a region of the world?
I think it would be more towards how an individual understands their heritage, I guess, is what it would be more based on. It's more preemptive right now until we can get into individualized sequencing, but as far as someone who is really interested in their own personalized nutrition and how that's going to affect their longevity, you can kind of make slight dietary modifications that don't have any major concerns. Like you can switch from eating white bread to legumes and feel a lot better about it if you're maybe of like African descent or something like that. Just interesting. I mean, I don't think it will have any major biomedical implications, but until we get into personalized nutrition. nutrition. And then this is just one really clear example of how evolution has helped us understand these things. As I mentioned, like apolipoprotein and things like that, and vitamin delivery, that'll be where we get into real, it affects bone density in deep studies. So that'll be where like the real super biomedical implications come from. Starch digestion is kind of just like a fun example.
Yeah, that's kind of a peripheral question. When you say recent, what do you mean time-wise? You're talking evolution.
Recent, I would say in the last like 10,000 years.
Okay,
is
that's
probably-
what I was
that's
wondering.
what-
Okay.
That's what
You're
gets
saying
really
recent, I'm like, they ate a lot of bread during the French Revolution, but I don't think that.
Yeah, it gets really interesting with all that kind of stuff because you're taking evolutionary biology, paleontology, archaeology, and then nutritional scientists, and they're all working together and showing how they all play off of each other. So again, I'm a big proponent of better science education, and I like to see very interdisciplinary work done. Any other questions?
Not a question, just more of a comment. Just utilize the neutral position a little bit more. You're like right now, you're hands are in your pockets, but like you're very knowledgeable of your subject. You know exactly what you're talking about. So just the power of the neutral position, like hands at your side, will just show
Okay.
that.
I think your ability to answer questions is a huge strength of yours. You're very comfortable, and the answers are clear and like more than just a very brief answer. So that's a definite strength.
First of all, it's really cool subject matter. I mean, as a chemist, I wouldn't even think about this. But I just think you could be a teens a bit louder. I don't know if it's just because you know the size of the room, you don't really have to be, but I just thought I'd mention.
Okay.
Anything else? All right, thank you.
Cool.